feel.
So everyone, welcome to Let's Talk Native on this Tuesday, September 3rd. Welcome, September. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at our history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity, and we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us. And we do it all right here from the Seneca Nation, from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk native. But first, let me remind people that our audio streams at www.letstalknative.com. We stream video of the show on Facebook Live, on our Facebook group pages. And we take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud after the broadcast, and we take the video and we put it up on YouTube, on the YouTube channel that we have, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I'm going to come right out of the gate here and say, look, we're still experiencing some internet issues. We think we're on top of it, but we're not quite there yet. So hopefully we don't lose too many of you that are trying to catch us, at least on Facebook. The audio should be fine, but the video may still be a bit choppy until we put it up on our YouTube channel. All right. Hey, look, I'm the host and producer, and I'm joined in studio by Jake Proud, who is managing our video and our sound. All right, I asked the question, who owns the land? And I'm not gonna answer the question, or give the answer right off the bat, or an answer. I'm gonna tell a little bit of a story I heard told by somebody else one time at a meeting. And this guy's from Makwasasni, and he told a story. Let me frame it up a little bit. Our concept of land ownership, in the way that Europeans took it, was something that was different. In fact, ownership wasn't necessarily the way we framed it. We framed about who the land was for and that kind of thing, and it wasn't a possession. Much of our lives were we lived more in sync with nature, and it was less about ownership of land, protecting a territory like much of wildlife will do. Yeah, that was a part of what we did, but land ownership we held the whole concept differently. So here's the when these cultures clash, and this idea of owning land or owning a piece of paper that says you own land or whatever else, we began to formulate a better way to express that. So here's the story. Story is a white man rides up to a native territory, and of course comes upon a few native people and sees the oldest man, of course, and he assumes, oh, that's got to be the chief. So he goes up and he says, "Hey, chief, I'd like to I really like your land here, and I'd really be interested in some of it. I'd like to talk to the landowners." And so the older man, chief or no chief, said, "Well, the landowners aren't here." And so the white man says, "Well, when will they be back, or when will they be here?" And the older native man says, "Let me think." And he looks off the side and he sees there's a group of young women that are working on a task, and he looks at the one young woman who's obviously got a little bit of a baby bump going on. He turns back to the white man. He says, "About 5 months." And he said, "So the landowner isn't going to be here for 5 months?" "Yeah, 5 months." So the white man rides away. And then he comes back about 5 months later, 6 months later, and looks for the same man. He says, "Hey! Remember you told me that the landowner would be back? It should have been back about a month ago. So are the landowners here?" And the older man says, "No, they're not here." And he says, "Well, when will they be back? When will they be here?" And he looks over and same group of women. This time there's a little baby there. The one is attending to. They're all kind of cooing over the baby, and one of the other young women has a you can see she's with child. He says, 3 months. And so he says, 3 months. He says, all right, I'll be back. So this story kind of repeats itself over and over again. And every time this gentleman shows up, he's given the same story, that the landowner's not there, and that they're, that they, and so he doesn't understand. So, and here's the story. The story is, in our culture, we look at the land as something that is for the future. We say that the landowners are the unborn. That once we are born, we immediately become the caretakers of the land for the future generations. And this isn't just restricted just to people. It's the same thing that the same view we have about the animals and the rest of creation. That the land itself, the world itself, once we're here, we're only temporary. That the land is for the future, for the future generations of people, of the deer, the fox, the wolf, all those animals we represent with our clans. It's those future generations that the land is for. The land is always for the future. So when we talk about land ownership, and it's not it may sound like a bit of a bizarre concept, but think about it. There was a time that people would try to claim land that they would build their families on, and they would hold that land for the future. And of course, that was at a time when people would care for the land a little bit more. But as the shift, and it is a shift. Although we could argue that the colonies and imperialism was born out of capitalism and born out of exploitation and that kind of stuff. But it was also born out of people trying to be very, very opportunistic at the cost of other people. In our case, the cost of us. But the idea of destroying land was not part of the original concept. I think everybody thought that nature had this, it knew no bounds in terms of what it could supply with trees, with livestock, with the beaver wars, the fishing the seas. That nature always was going to have plenty there. In our culture, we always had a sense that no, we need to know our place in nature, and we need to flow and live in harmony. Now, I'm not saying that that Native people lived this perfect utopian life, but some of these basic concepts, and of course the whole idea when I say that the land is for the future, it's for the landowners are the unborn. It's for those faces that will come later. That's totally in keeping with the concept of 7 generations. Again, for those of you who think you understand or don't understand, but maybe need it explained. 7 generations isn't just this idea that we have this prophetic or these prophecies that 7 generations from now there's going to be, a second coming of the Gunawida or Jesus or whatever else. No, that's not what 7 generations in our culture is about. We don't talk about the 7th generation as some prophetic or some fulfillment of prophecy. No, that's not what that's the idea of the 7 generations is that we need to have a responsibility, not just for that baby bump that's going to come see us in 3 months, but for the children we will never see, for those unborn faces, not just the ones that we will see soon, not just our kids or our grandkids or our great grandkids, but you start. And you can see, and I've had family reunions. I've had, gatherings with my wife's family in particular, where we had 5 generations of women, and we always used to take a picture so we get a photo of 5 generations of women. We never got one of 6, and 7 would be virtually impossible. And so this is the idea. The idea is to have a responsibility to our family, our descendants, our great grandchildren, having a responsibility to our family that we will never see, because at some point it all becomes family. So we have to have a responsibility to the future. And it's not just about do no harm. It's that. It is that. But it's not just that. It's about making sure that even the things that don't look like they would have a direct harm, that might have a long-term damage or long-term harm, we take all that stuff into consideration. That goes against every capitalist principle. I mean, every principle associated with business as it's known today in the global economy, it's return on investment. What do? If you're going to buy land, how do you make that land crank out money? So whether you take it out in timber, whether you take it out in logging and water rights, take it out in gravel or stone or mineral or drilling for oil, you make that land produce money with no regard for how long it will produce, because look, you only need to get your money back and make something. That's a completely different concept. And of course, in the case of a country like the United States, they always felt like, well, we'll just grab more land. And that's the whole idea of imperialism. Because if you get all the money out of your land, then you obviously have to get more land. So you take more. You take all the lands. I mean, and again, we can go right to, I keep bringing this up, and I think at some point more people are going to grab onto this thing. You look at the language in the Declaration of Independence. Everybody wants to say, well, the reason that the colonies declared their independence, which essentially was declaring war, was because they were being taxed. It was taxation without representation. Bullshit. The reason the wealthy colonial aristocracy wanted to separate from England was because England was saying, look, we want to work together with forming a new nation there. I'm not going to blow a bunch of smoke up their ass either, but England basically said, look, we're not going to go in there and take a bunch of native land. We don't need that kind of headache. So England was already taking a position in moving away from the ethical and morality of slavery, and at the same time is saying we're not going to go to war with we don't even know how many native people there are. So we better be careful what we wish for. We're better off working relationships. In fact, it's worked out pretty good so far. The native people helped us push back against France and in Canada and other places. The native people have been good allies. And that was the view that England had. Well, the colonies didn't want to have any of it. In one of their complaints, and I don't have it here in front of me, in one of their facts submitted to a candid world, they talked about the fact that the king was not allowing them to bring more immigrants in. Now, again, when you're talking about immigrants, I mean, it sounds like, well, look at that. They were trying to stop immigration. The king was trying to stop immigration way back then. You have to understand, when the colonies are saying immigrants, what they're talking about is bringing in more Europeans to displace the population of native people. In that same complaint about immigration, they said the king was also preventing them from appropriating more lands. Well, who the hell do you think they were appropriating it from? Because that's the model. The model was to grab land, fill it up with white people, move out the native people, kill them if you have to. And that's not the concept that we had towards land. Land was something that, if anything, owned us more than we owned it. If you want to put it into this whole idea about, who's living off of who, so to speak. But again, 7 generations, this idea that the land belongs to the unborn, to the future, not to people to take now. And of course, the other issue ends up being, when you claim to own the land, what does that mean? Does that mean you have the right to do with whatever you want to do with it? You can slash and burn. You can tear up a mountaintop. You can dam a river. You can pollute the land. You can pollute the air and the water around it. I mean, you can do all that stuff, because that's what the idea of land ownership became under the European model. But see, that wasn't our concept. Our concept was based on having a relationship and having responsibility to it. I mean, we oftentimes look to our women in the same way that, other life on the planet, the mothers and the way they care for the young, and the way that they become a little bit more bound to the land, even than the men do. Men have they have a tendency to wander. I don't mean wander in terms of promiscuity. I'm just talking about, that's what we call the son, the ultimate warrior, because our eldest brother, because he travels the earth from east to west every day, and it's a metaphor. I mean, we know the sun is what the sun is. We know what it is. But the women have a certain responsibility. Not only are they the ones who carry the unborn until they're born. So we place a certain responsibility with the women in particular, and again, in our culture. And we say the women are the title holders. And that sometimes has different meanings to different people. The title holders mean that they hold the wampums, right? For the 49 families. They hold those titles, and that's how, and they have a responsibility in putting up one of their sons, not their biological sons, but one of the men of their clan to serve a specific role with that title. So there's that. But when this idea of land title became an issue, we were very clear that our women are the ones vested with the title of the land for the unborn. And of course, the male dominant culture that came from Europe gave no such reverence or no such deference to women. And women themselves were treated as property, just like like the land was. So we have these conversations. I mean, look, this isn't I'm not telling everybody to take their deeds and burn them or anything else. But if you can just formulate a different view, I mean, if you do have title to a land, if you have a white man's paper to a land, whether, frankly, here I live on the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation. The Seneca Nation issues deeds. It's still kind of a white man's concept. But again, these aren't state deeds, they aren't federal deeds. But if you have the good fortune to have some legal claim to say this land is in your family now, not just yours, but that you have the opportunity to care for that land for the future generations. Now, it doesn't, I mean, you could say, well, it's only your future generations, but eventually those generations that are future, our heirs, they mingle, they intermarry, and there's so when you say it's for the future and it's for your heirs, it's for the heirs of everybody. So if we begin to understand this, and we begin this whole idea of understanding, we need to make sure that the land, especially native lands, because let's face it, we've had our lands diminish so significantly, from what the white man viewed as lands that we occupied. We occupy a much smaller space, and our populations are smaller, but our populations are growing. So we need to be extra vigilant about caring for our land, and again, contamination. And that's why we have to hold the white man accountable for what they do to our water, to our air, and to our land. I mean, when I talk about the concern that we should have for the hazardous materials that travel on the thruway, or on U.S. Route 5 and 20 or 86, or on the rails that cross through native territories, and the Seneca Nation has all that right here. There's pipelines that go through. There should be real vigilance, and at some point there should be a conversation on what you do to mitigate the risks of some of these hazardous materials. Bomb trains. There you go. You take a look at what happened up in Quebec, at Lac Megantic, when a bomb train derailed and literally destroyed a town. The trains that carry this Bakken crew that went across the Seneca territory literally are almost on the waterfront. They literally separate the rest of Seneca Territory from the lake, from Lake Erie. So if there was to be some calamity with one of these bomb trains, it not only would damage. I mean, it also runs right by the bingo hall. It crosses a couple of Route 5. I mean, and then it runs right along the lake, and it has the potential to not only destroy land but to contaminate water. That's not that's not having an eye on the future generations, 7 generations or any future generations. That right there, folks. That's people trying to make money today. The whole idea of doing this hydrofracking for natural gas and for oil. It's about trying to get every dollar. I mean, literally, it comes to the place where the view is that there's money under the ground. I mean, there's literally money under the ground in the form of natural gas, in the form of oil, perhaps in coal or other valuable minerals. And if that's the way you view the land, if you don't view the land as supporting life, but rather than supporting finances, that's how we end up with the Amazon being set afire. That's how it happens. That's how we get to that place. That's how we get to the place where we become derelict in our responsibilities to maintain and to ensure that land is protected for the future generations. Okay, we're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll get into it a little bit more. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We're right back after this.
riches under the ground. Forget the treaties when money's round. Dig up the bones and rape the land. This is more than we can stand. We will not be idle anymore. We will not be idle anymore. The time has come to
All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Hey, before I get back into it, I want to thank my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank Eric White and ERW Enterprises. And there's a couple of you out there who remain anonymous, but I thank you just the same. Look, and I also want to thank those people who've supported the show in the past. We're in our 10th year of Let's Talk Native, and we wouldn't be here if we didn't have a lot of help along the way. While I greatly appreciate those who are currently supporting the program, supporting what we do here, I can't ignore the fact that we've had many people along the way that have supported my doing this show, especially when we're on commercial radio. So I want to thank all of you. I also want to thank those of you who share the show, whether you share, as my wife does, the Facebook live stream on various group pages, or whether you share the podcast, and we do a podcast, so you can subscribe to that and make sure you share the audio of the show that way. And of course, we have our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV, and that's a way that you can not only share this program, but the program that I do in New York City as well as the short form videos that we do. And there's a number of those that we've done over the years that address a variety of topics. Some of what we talk about here on a twice a week basis, I guess. All right, let me get back into it. But in the last program, I talked about the kids going back to school, and actually, I think tomorrow or the next day is the first day of school. So we're coming right up on day one. And I know many kids have started school already, especially farther down south. I've got two grandkids who live in Pennsylvania, and they started school already. But many kids are starting either tomorrow or the next day, their first day of school. And I talked about the responsibility that we have as Native people who can share some of the knowledge that we've gained over the years, and tell some of the stories and explain some of the true facts of history that are either left out of our kids' education, so it's almost lies by omission. So there's that, and then there's some of the stuff that's just blatantly wrong. But there's also a lot that we can't expect them to teach our kids. So when we talk about things like who owns land, this whole land issue is something that we should explain. And if we're the ones explaining it, then we're not going to have somebody say, well, yeah, white people came in and claimed land because Native people said they didn't own it. No, that's not exactly true. And so with the whole idea that under the so-called doctrine of Christian discovery that the church could say, well, Native people don't own land, they just live there. They actually took a concept and they tried to dehumanize us to put us at the same level that the way they look down upon other creatures of the earth. We just live there like the animals, that we don't have a sense of land title. We don't have a sense of ownership. And so we don't own it. So only the Christian nations of Europe can own. Of course, that's absurd. But, nobody teaches this to our kids in school. So we need to explain, no, there's a real logic and a real advanced understanding about our place in the world with the way that we viewed things like land ownership. No, it wasn't that we were primitive or too ignorant or too uncivilized to understand the value of land. We absolutely understood the value, and that's why we understood that owning it was a way to really devalue land, not value it. If you only put valuation on land based on dollars and cents, not on the fact that land can have a benefit forever. But if you don't look at yourself as part of a continuum with your past and your future, so your ancestors are behind you and those faces, those unborn faces ahead of you. That's what Ongwe is, right? That's what Ongwe is. That's why white men are not Ongwe. Because the second they start looking at land as something they can put a dollar value on, the second they look at land as something that they can just pillage and take value out of. See, this really does get back to the issue about the things that we should be teaching our children. Now, one thing I did leave out of the last conversation about this was, look, the clash of our history and U.S. history is not very pleasant. It is, it's an ugly history, and I'm not just going to say from time to time. the vast majority of our interaction, of the culture clash between Native people and the colonials, the settler colonialism, is ugly. There's everything from rape and murder and, disfigurement, scalping, torture. Again, when I listen to the progressive, howl about kids in cages, at the border, yeah, that's a terrible thing. And why do I say it's a terrible thing? Because our people went through that. Our kids were family separation. Yeah, that's a hallmark of the United States. When I hear somebody say, "Oh, it's so un-American," no, it isn't. It's very American. But the reason I'm bringing some of this stuff up is we do have to have age-appropriate conversations with our kids. And it's not because our kids can't handle it, but I think, I think you have to, when you think about how violent the interaction was between white people and Native people, and white people and black people, the idea of lynching people, the idea of selling children and that kind of stuff. I mean, and again, let's not forget, Native people were the first slaves that the first slaves to be put on a boat on the transatlantic slave trade were Native people being whisked back to Spain, and not just for labor, because they brought young girls because they knew that they would sell well in Europe as sex slaves. That's Columbus's legacy. So we have to have age appropriate conversations. I mean, because there was so much of a rape culture associated with Europeans that came here, and not just here, every place they went. I mean, again, if you look at Captain Cook's journals when he was traveling through the Pacific, he literally wrote in his journal about coming upon Hawaii, his concern about the venereal diseases that his men carried and how much death and destruction it would cause to the people of Hawaii if his men were to go ashore. And they did. They'd go ashore. And again, many people, it's funny, when they talk about the disease that Native people died from and succumbed to, and they always say, oh, it was influenza, smallpox. No. The most immediate disease that had a staggering effect on our people were venereal diseases. These guys were pigs that showed up. I'm going to tell you, let's not sugarcoat it. I mean, everybody thinks that, Columbus was this pious, brave navigator, explorer, who was doing the work of the church. Look, the church giving him cover, but these guys are scumbags. I mean, again, he was giving little girls to pay. That's how he was paying his men. So, look. So when we tell this history to our kids, there is a certain age appropriateness to it. I mean, it's funny because Jake and I were talking on the way here. I don't know at what age we become fully aware of things like violent crime, and to the point where we really need to understand it and put it into our decision making, our fight or flight, responses, all that stuff. I don't know what age that is. But certainly, if you have to consider what the age appropriateness of that, now you mix in things like massacres and mutilations and sexual abuse, not just from the rape culture of the imperial ages, but even through the ages of assimilation. These residential schools, the amount of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse that took place there. I argue that when people seem so aghast that the Catholic Church has been mired in this controversy. Some of the first sexual deviancy that clergy had become connected to was for residential schools, and not just here. I mean, this was happening all over the world. I mean, and it wasn't just, when I say clergy, it isn't just priests; it was nuns too. I mean, why is there a connection between these people who commit themselves to this so-called celibacy of the church and yet rape little boys and little girls? Whether it isn't just about sexual repression, it goes beyond that. It must say something about the people who choose that way of life. I don't know. But when the idea that people seem to be, how could, that's such a violation. And like they're thunderstruck that this happened. Well, if you had asked Native people 100 years ago, they'd have told you what was happening with church and clergy running these residential schools. And of course, although we do need to have age-appropriate conversations with our kids, we can't pull the punches to the point where we don't explain what the real dangers are and why we still carry some of that historical trauma. So again, school's back in session, and so I do want to remind people that that we have work to do. We have to we've got to backfill the omissions. We've got to correct the mischaracterizations and the outright lies. And we need to frame. We need to help our kids have a frame of reference as they're dealing with everything from sports to the STEM courses, the math and sciences, all that stuff. We need to have some conversations so we can frame some of their references. This is we are not an inferior people. We've been that's what's been preached to. That's what we were told, right? We were told that we were primitive. And look, I think some people buy into it. And because we don't have the same view of what they call civilization. We have a different view. So we need to explain even to our children that we don't have to be ashamed. We don't have to be ashamed of having a different view of the humanity, the study of human beings, and the relationship that human beings have to creation. That there's nothing to be ashamed of if we view our place on this earth as not as the lords of the planet, not as those that should be subduing all of the creatures of the earth, as they say in Genesis in the Bible. No, our place isn't to subdue the creatures of the earth; it's to live with them. And and this gets back to the original topic about who owns the land. The land is supporting all of us. Only man has this destructive nature. I mean, and I'm not just talking about the mass destruction of war, but even the way we exploit animals. So you think about the way, our consumption. Think about the way animals are bred and raised for food. I mean, it's incredible. Pumped up with steroids and antibiotics so they can get more bulk out of them. Man is the only creature on the earth that harvests the milk of another creature for their consumption, and they do it in such a way that it's mind-boggling. I mean, when you think about how much livestock is raised for meat and milk, so when I say livestock, that means how many fields of corn and grains are raised for meat and milk. I mean, it's kind of bizarre. We don't raise food. I mean, and look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, although there's plenty of agroscience that has gone into understanding that we can get a better yield for the needed proteins in our diet from plant proteins than we can from animal proteins. But you see, this is some of the stuff that again, there's some phenomenal accomplishments that Native people made, and I'm not saying a specific Native person because that's not our way. I mean, here's a simple simple thing that I was actually blown away with. And so you want to talk about sciences, right? You think, well, what could Native people contribute to science? And there's plenty. But as much as we frame the whole story of where roast corn comes from, and how we managed to take corn that was meant to be destroyed by Washington and his men, or the French before them, for that matter, and we managed to utilize the fact that they tried to scorch and burn all our food to break the hulls and consume the corn as roast corn. But the idea of washing corn with ash, I was fascinated with it. I went to listened to Jane Mount Pleasant from Cornell. She's Tuscarora, and she was speaking. I think it was at Canisius College, and she talked about the corn diet, the white corn diet by itself, would leave a population with some significant vitamin deficiencies. However, because one of the ways that we preserved corn, and we processed corn, was to wash it with ash. And we washed it with ashes because it served as a caustic lye, to break down the hulls, so we could separate the hulls and the corn from the hulls. And then that would be dried for flour or cornmeal or whatever. The interesting thing is, and we could argue whether our people would have any way of knowing this, but the interesting thing is that wood ash actually infused the corn with certain B vitamin complexes that the corn didn't have by itself. So the very way that we process the food enriched the food. I mean, in modern society, we don't think twice about food being enriched artificially with various chemicals or whatever. But the idea that for perhaps thousands of years, our people utilized a process of processing corn that actually enriched it and gave it more, made it more wholesome and more nutritious to us. I mean, that's fascinating. And Frank, that's science. The whole idea that the way we utilize the chemicals of wood ash to process food, just like the way we would use wood ash and brain to tan leather and that kind of stuff. There's some science involved in this stuff, and there's no reason our people can't, our young people shouldn't be taught this. Not that they've got to necessarily do it, but you know what? I've talked about this before. One of the things that connects us to the land more than anything else is understanding how much the land can yield, not just for us, but how much it can sustain us. So when we talk about survival skills, basic survival skills, I mean, in what would be the rites of passage for both, boys and girls, young men and young women, it would involve spending some significant time being really exposed to nature, almost without having the protection of everybody around you. But you realize that that's not necessarily a dangerous thing. It creates a bond between people and the land, between people and the rest of creation, our young people. If we don't do something along those lines, we will continue to perpetuate this idea that land is only something that you take and you profit from, not necessarily understand the relationship between ourselves and land as something that is symbiotic, so to speak, that we give something back. I mean, our farming techniques, I mean, if you compared the yields that we were getting from mound farming versus what Europe at the same time was getting from tilling the soil, turning the soil over, which over-oxygenated and depleted the soil at a much, they had to rotate crops all the time. And they would see the yields decrease over time until they come up with the idea of fertilizing first with animal waste. Now what do? Now they just pump the land full of chemicals. And again, it's about trying to get all the money out of the land, utilizing every acre you can to produce dollars. And as long as that's going to be the predominant way that land is viewed by the dominant culture, it makes it even that much more important that we begin to return, return to having a better relationship with between us and the land and creation. And I know it sounds, this isn't a new age concept. It really isn't. And this isn't something that I'm trying to put out there as some touchy-feely feel-good stuff. No, this is, again, talk about survival. I say it in my opening. We talk about survival. Survival, our survival, and the survival of any creature is really contingent on our ability to adapt not just to environment, but to environmental forces. And I'll tell you, mankind is a force, and it may not be a natural force. I mean, it may seem like the most unnatural force of all, but it's still something we have to figure out how we navigate a world that is being placed in peril for $1. I mean, we talk about the burning Amazon. The Congolese rainforest is those fires are even bigger. There's the boreal forest of Russia and Canada. There are fires happening everywhere, and so why were some of the boreal forests eliminated in Canada? So they could dig the ground up underneath for tar sands oil. So these are some of the things that we have to do a better job teaching. And it really does come down to this issue about how we view ourselves and our relationship to the land that we live on. And again, when we call ourselves Ungwe Ungwe, and we say that, I mean, there are a lot of loose translations for what Ungwe Ungwe means. Real, original, true. But in our culture, what we say is you cannot be a real human being if you don't have an ancestral connection to where you live, a tie to the land. If you don't have that connection to where you live, then there's something that's been severed. I mean, that's why in our medicine pouches we used to carry that. We used to put the umbilical cord in there. You know, the parents or grandparents would save that, and that would be something that would go in the medicine pouch. Why? Because it shows about your connection. And you know what else would go in the medicine pouch? The very earth that we walk on. Because that connection to your mother and the connection to the soil of your mother and yourself, that's what makes you Ungwe Ungwe, real human being. Because if you can just up and leave and disregard, thousands of years of your ancestry, understanding that relationship. Look, there's been 200 years of mass disruption in our own cultural understanding of many of these concepts. We actually probably we have more opportunity to teach now than probably the last 3 or 4 generations, maybe even back farther than that. I mean, if you look at some of our more recent history, see, it's funny when they teach these Iroquois study courses in school, they say, "Wow, this is how the Iroquois lived," and they teach it as if it was 200 years ago. In the 50s and the 60s, even the Haudenosaunee, who some people admire because of our continuity, right? Our guys were throwing Plains Indian headdresses on. So when we complain about people mischaracterizing Native people because they don't understand that there's no pan-Indian view, we got sucked into the same Hollywood concepts. Again, Haudenosaunee people wearing Plains Indian headdresses, not Gastoas, not what we know today. My much of my family from Ganawage lived in New York. I mean, they had a community in New York because of the high steel work that the men did out of coming out of the 50s, 60s, 70s. They had an area in Brooklyn they used to call it Little Cognawaga. If you see some of the ancient pictures, all those old pictures when they used to gather, look, they're wearing cheesy mock headdresses. So, and again, I'm not trying to poke fun at them because our culture had been so disrupted. The things that we taught, our understanding our relationship again to land, to our ancestors, but we've gotten it back. We've learned an immense amount. We've made sure that the messages that were encoded in our language were taught. The language is still solid. But we know more history today. It's like the Hawaiians. For decades, the Hawaiians were led to believe that their land was illegally annexed by the United States. It wasn't until back when the real push for sovereignty, during the 70s, the sovereignty movement of Native people, that the Hawaiians became aware of their own. But we can go through decades where we've been lied to, and we buy into those lies. So this is why teaching our children, teaching other adults for that matter. But some of this stuff can start at the most basic and core levels of understanding. Not just about our relationship with each other, but the relationship with where we live, the land that we live on. So, who owns the land? The future. We're all just here temporarily. So, keep that in mind as we go forward. I want to thank you guys for listening. Again, if you want to watch the video in its best form, look for it tomorrow on YouTube. We'll post it up on our YouTube channel. And I look forward to your comments and your thoughts on the subject matter. I'll be going to New York this week, so you can catch my show in New York City on WBAI 99.5 on the FM dial if you're in the city, or at www.wbai.org. You can stream the show, and of course, we'll post it on Facebook down there as well. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.